Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Financing Energy Efficiency Projects, What to Know Before You Sign. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items. First, you can submit questions to the Q&A portion by sending them in the chat, which you can access by hovering your cursor over the speech bubble icon on the bottom right of your screen. We ask that you send your questions to the host, but if you have the option, all panelists second. A link to the recording and presentation slides will be sent to registrants after the webinar. The presentation slides were also sent to the webinar about an hour before. To enable closed captioning, please click on the chat bubble labeled as CC on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. You can select the language of your choosing via AI translation. Now I'm going to introduce our presenter, Neil, and begin the recording.
Well, thank you very much, Chris, for the introduction, and welcome everybody to today's talk on financing energy efficiency projects, what to know before you sign. I hope you all are coming off of a wonderful Labor Day weekend and looking forward to the changing leaf colors as I am here in New England and New York area. So rather than delaying, let's just jump right in and start the presentation. I would prefer to have questions held off until the end, but feel free to enter them into the chat box, and I'll be happy to address any questions or concerns that you may have after today's presentation towards the end, only because we have a lot of material to cover. So start with the learning objectives, and I want to go over the pros and cons of 8 different financing options that are commonly used with energy efficiency, performance contracting, and renewable energy projects, and how you can use these different financing structures to overcome some common management financial hurdles that we find both in the public and private sectors. Specifically going to be talking about loans, capital leases, operating leases, tax-exempt leases, power purchase agreements, energy performance contracts, ESAs or energy service agreements, and PACE. So we'll drill down into each one of those a little. And I'm going to also introduce you to the Inflation Reduction Act program, some of them, as they will affect and provide funding and tax savings for some of the installations that you're going to be doing in order to realize the energy savings or the renewable energy benefits that the projects bring. I'm also going to talk a little bit about some of the EPA Energy Star financing tools and resources. And I'm going to take a minute or two, actually probably 5 minutes, to go over the cost of delay by using the EPA Energy Star cash flow opportunity calculator. The reason why is, one of the hurdles that I hear all the time is we just don't have the money to do the project. And when I hear that, the reality is that if the energy efficiency that you can realize in the building is greater than the cost of financing the project, it should be a no-brainer in order to implement that project, because I'm a big believer in anything that saves you money or increases your cash flow should be immediately implemented. And of course, with the world of energy efficiency, we're looking at some of the environmental considerations that we should all be responsible citizens and manage for our future generations. So let's start a little bit about some of the savings opportunities in buildings and why we're working with EPA and what the EPA Energy Star does in support of folks like you in order to implement these programs. So it's aligning with a trusted brand to communicate your energy management accomplishments. That's certainly if you sign up and become an Energy Star partner. So really what I'm doing is I'm pushing you to become a partner if you haven't already. You get access to a variety of promotional materials, and you can co-brand with Energy Star. What do you need to do that? It's very simple. You just commit to measuring and tracking benchmarking buildings. You implement a plan to improve it. You educate and communicate with others. And for more information about how to join Energy Star and become an Energy Star partner, just click on the link, the hot link that's at the bottom of the slide. As Chris said earlier, we're going to be sending out the copies of the slide presentation, so you will get the slides including all the hot links that are embedded in this presentation today. So before we get into the different financing alternatives, I'd like to review some of the first things that need to be addressed before you even consider financing. Some of them are pretty obvious, but little insert here about finance in today's economy in September 2024. This has not changed all that much, although things are getting a little bit better. But we are dealing with some serious increased costs due to inflation. Project costs are going up, labor costs are going up, higher interest rates really having a squeeze on the ability to do more comprehensive energy efficiency projects. So being able to find lower cost or longer term financing alternatives really becomes critical when you're going to be doing comprehensive energy efficiency improvements in your properties. Right now, there's just tighter credit standards for new loans. Lenders are uncertain about the future. As I think, everybody has a lot of question marks what's coming down the road. But because of the uncertainty, lenders tend to prefer shorter terms in addition to tighter credit standards and higher interest rates. So that's hamstringing things a little bit. And of course, the impact on energy savings, that lagging utility rates tend to require longer financing terms to make these projects work. So some of the IRA financing incentives that we're going to be talking about now can prove to be extremely valuable when you're looking at how do you fund your energy efficiency or renewable energy project. But before deciding on the options, the best financing options require some strategic planning and self-evaluation. Well, what do we have to look at? I suggest that you start with getting an energy assessment from a qualified energy service provider, because different technologies lend themselves to alternative financing solutions. And we're going to drill down on that in today's talk. You need to define short and long-term business goals. Do you own? Do you lease? Are you growing? Are you reorganizing? Things static. What are you going to need this year, next year, and 5 years? So these are good questions to understand before you delve into how to finance a project. You also need to understand how you look from the other side, your financial profile. How would a traditional lender score you? Are there any limitations you have on debt, or do you have any existing loans, bank loans that contain conflicting covenants? Covenants, when you enter into a bank loan, just as a quick insertion here, that when you deal with the bank, they may require that you send them ongoing performance reviews, financial statements, because they're going to be looking at how well you're performing. Because if you don't meet their requirements as they've laid out in the agreed loan terms, they could call on the loan, which obviously creates cash flow challenges. And of course, you want to explore all possible incentives. You want to take advantage of any savings, grants, etc., that you can capture. And that's at the utility level, the local level, state and federal level. I should probably, a little side note here, I have to apologize. I wound up getting COVID last week, so I'm at the back end of that, very recovered, but I can still feel it a little bit in my voice, so bear with me. So where do we start? Great place to start, your state energy office. That's become increasingly important because a lot of the financing programs and the grant programs that have been initiated through the IRA and the federal government are being managed by the local states. So it's a great place. There's a hot link there to get to the National Association of State Energy Officials. And there's a wonderful loan map, state energy loan map, that you can click on. The second area is the ZERA USA, and that is a database of state incentives for renewable and energy efficiency. It's managed by North Carolina State University. And, it's really a wonderful resource, great places to start. But before you start seeking financing, as I had mentioned before, you need to understand the benefits and the consequences of all different alternative financing structures. And that's what we're going to be going over today. So a quick mention to the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. Key takeaways. Well, $891 billion includes $783 billion in energy and climate change. Some of the really big changes here is direct pay or elective pay option for tax-exempt organizations. Why is this a big deal? Because in the past, for tax-exempt entities, in order for them to take advantage of tax benefits, you had to pay taxes. Well, because tax-exempt organizations don't pay taxes, they were forfeiting that benefit. So the federal government decided to change that and allow and provide motivation for some of the tax-exempt organizations to actually implement some of these programs by direct pay, which they can get reimbursed for tax credits, for example, or allow them the ability to transfer some of the tax credits and monetize these options, which they were restricted from doing as tax-exempt entities in the past. So this is really, really a big change, and it's a wonderful change with regards to moving the market, certainly in the public sector. Private sector, they've always been able to take advantage of the tax credits and deductions, but the public sector folks have been hamstrung. They've been restricted, and that's a wonderful thing. Of course, there are new tax credits for different technologies, and as I had mentioned, they've opened it up for not only tax-exempt organizations, but not-for-profits, religious organizations, and REITs, which had been limited with regards to how much energy savings they could pass through to the investors under the old laws. So Section G, the energy security section. This is the one that provides the tax credits and deductions to promote private sector investments in clean energy and to reduce CO2 emissions. The changes in the code help the U.S. real estate sector reduce its carbon footprint by creating a deduction, Section 179D, and I'll get into that in just a minute. Providing tax credits to encourage investments, that's Section 48. Tax credit to incentivize EV charging stations, and a tax credit to incentivize energy efficiency and new residential construction, 45L, as well as the homeowner managing energy savings rebate program. Now, it's worth mention to point out the fact that a tax credit and a deduction are very different things. A deduction allows you to reduce the amount of taxes that you have to pay. A tax credit you can use to offset a tax that you already owe. So if you don't owe taxes because you're not making a lot of profit, the tax credit has less value to you than it would be if you could totally offset that. And that's one of the big benefits here, is that if you don't have the need because you're not generating enough profit, you can now look at monetizing that credit, which you could not do in the past. So let's start with the 179D under the Inflation Reduction Act, which expands the deductions for and opens it up to architects, engineers, design build contractors, and other designers of tax-exempt buildings, both government and nonprofit. That's the big change. Of course, building owners, commercial and multifamilies also benefit due to the changes, but the big change really is in the tax-exempt area. Of course, REITs and residential building owners as well will benefit. The benefits start at $50 cents per square foot for energy savings of 25% up to $1 per square foot for energy savings of 50% on a sliding scale. So if your energy savings don't hit 50%, you will get a portion of that 5X bonus. In order to get the 5X bonus, you have prevailing wage and apprentice requirements. What does that mean? Well, you have to pay prevailing wage. Who decides that? Secretary of Labor. You have to pay it during construction, repairs, and alterations going into the future. You also have a requirement for apprentices to participate in the project. And in order to qualify, you need to track labor hours, ratios, participation requirements, etc. It's important to mention here that the regular 179 deduction, which has been around for a long time, and in the past, or up until today, may have been a preferred type of deduction for doing energy efficiency projects is being scaled down over time. In order to qualify for the 179D requires a lot of paperwork and tracking. The regular 179 did not require that tracking, which is why up until today, a lot of the deductions were taken strictly as a 179D. However, that's being scaled down over time. Right now, you can only capture 60% of the 179D, which is expiring in 2027, increasing the value of the 179D deduction for energy efficiency improvements. So while that might not have been a path in the past, it's becoming increasingly important with regards to being able to capture the value of doing your energy efficiency improvements. Now, the qualifications for retrofits has been reduced. There was a decrease in energy use intensity, UI, from 50% to 25%. That's great. And the requirement for an energy simulation model was removed for retrofits. Right now, you can, using an energy efficiency model, which is recommended by the Department of Energy, and a new construction, you can forecast the savings and be able to capture and qualify for the 179D. However, when you're doing a retrofit, you used to have to model it out. Well, that's no longer the case. And the good news is that the Energy Star Portfolio Manager can now be used for a project where you track your energy efficiency improvements over time, 1 year against the next. And if you're able to demonstrate through the Portfolio Manager savings of 25 to 50%, you're able to capture the 179D deduction. That's a very big change and a big help. I'm going to talk more about the Portfolio Manager at the end. A lot keeps on popping up in today's talk. That's a wonderful tool. If you're not familiar with it, I strongly urge you to attend some of the Portfolio Manager webinars that are available through EPA and Energy Star. So let's take a look at Section 48 investment tax credits. I had mentioned that a tax credit is different than a deduction. You can use it in order to offset taxes that you already do. So we're starting with a 6% of the cost of the energy project. That's the base rate. You can scale it up to 30% of the cost, which is called the bonus rate, if the project pays prevailing wage and meets the apprenticeship requirements. Microturbines are limited to a 2% base rate and a 10% bonus rate. However, the technologies have been expanded somewhat and now include wind, storage, biomass, geothermal, solar, small irrigation, landfill, hydro, the list goes on. The beauty here is that you can transfer the credit to third parties. Companies with little or no tax liability that could not normally take advantage of these tax credits, like REITs, now have the option to transfer or sell the credit to another tax-paying entity that can use them. What's interesting about this is that there are brokerages that are being established right now, where you can bring your tax credit to a broker and they will find a buyer for you. The investment tax credit may be refundable for tax-exempt entities. However, it is subject to a 5-year recapture period and a 3-year carryback. So what do we mean by the recapture period? Well, if you sell the property or sell the asset within the first 5 years, you may have to refund some of the credits that you had taken up front. So clearly, if you're planning on selling your property or selling your business over the next 5 years, keep that in the back of your mind when you decide what type of financing you need to implement in order to get this project off the ground. Quick word about the alternative credit bumps or stacking is the phrase that you'll hear. The 5X bonus credit must meet prevailing wage and apprentice requirements. I put in a hot link in this presentation. So if you want to drill down to see what those prevailing wages and apprentice requirements are, you can hit that link and it will bring you to the IRS webpage. Same thing with domestic content. You can get a bump for domestic content. 40% of the cost of any steel, iron, or manufactured product that is a component of an energy project must be produced in the United States. That can be a little complicated to figure out. As a matter of fact, many of these requirements can be complicated to figure out. Once again, I put a little link there in your IRS guidance with regards to the IRA domestic content bonus that's been updated and it's current as of today. The energy community, what is that? Well, if the project is located in a brownfield site or a statistical area, what's a statistical area? It's an area where direct employment or local tax revenues are coming from the extraction, processing, transport, or storage of coal, oil, or natural gas and has an unemployment rate at or above the national average. Interesting. Or the census tract, which deals with closing coal mines, retired coal-fired electric generating units, etc. And of course, low income. A lot of the programs that are developed underneath the IRA umbrella are focused on dealing with low income opportunities. We want to make sure that all communities have the ability to improve their energy consumption. At the end of the day, it helps everybody, not just the low income folks. Here's a little chart that shows you the stacking of by technology, and this is not all the technology, but it's a select. You can see the base rate here, which is 6% for everything except microturbines, and the 5X bonus credit. We went through that, how you can bump it up. The only change there is, again, microturbines is a little bit reduced. The domestic content we talked about, because it's a sliding scale, it can go from 2 to 10%, 5X. Same thing with the energy community, 5X. Low income, either you qualify or you don't. And as you can see here under the range, some of the ranges here, if you're doing small wind or you're doing solar, you can get up to 70% of the project reimbursed through the tax deductions or tax credits. So that's a really big incentive. So you need to really focus on how to make that happen. A little change of program here, new energy efficiency home tax credit and some of the changes. They've expanded the rules through 2032. Homes must be certified under the Energy Star programs to be eligible for the 2,500 tax credit, which is also subject to updates, meaning we hope it's going to continue to go up. Dwelling units certified under Zero Energy Ready Home programs has also been increased to $5,000. And of course, that's where you when you add some renewable energy to the energy efficiency, your home or your property becomes close to a zero load generator for the utilities. For multifamily units, the base qualification is decreased to $500. But the zero energy ready homes, multifamily units, are at $1,000, and they can be bumped up if you meet prevailing wage requirements up to $2,500, and for zero energy ready homes up to $5,000. Interestingly enough, prevailing wages in this category are required, but they do not require apprenticeship requirements. I don't know why. It may have been just an oversight, but right now that's the way the law reads. And of course, this year they've added EV charging stations and solar readiness to the different properties, so you can benefit from some, including those in your project itself. Now, Section 5121, Home Energy Efficiency Rebate Program, that's $4.3 billion that the Department of Energy was given to award grants to state energy offices in order to develop and implement homes rebate programs. 50% of the households with incomes lower than 80% of the median income will benefit from that. It's also for single and multifamily homes, as well as, the homes rebate programs, but however, that cannot be combined with other federal grant rebate programs. It's available to September 30th, 2031. I wish to point out that the $4.3 billion from the DOE is my understanding that those have been identified and awarded to the different state energy offices. So as I had pointed out on one of the earlier slides, if you're looking at funding your project, make sure you start with your state energy office. There may be some grants that are available to you for your project. They will know. So for more detailed information on implementation details, good place to start is a video that Department of Energy posted under New American Schools program. Now it is going into tax credits for schools. That being said, what you will learn by reviewing that presentation is applicable to many other organizations, not just schools. They will go through a deep dive into what is required in order to qualify. And it explores in detail the processes needed to capture these credits and grants in order to be in compliance with the Internal Revenue Service. As I had mentioned, applicable to other public sector organizations and private sector projects as well. And of course, the NASIO, National Association of State Energy Officials, can help you with some of that information. They do have similar information. I will wish to point out, however, that we strongly recommend that you include tax and IRA experts early in the planning process when you're pursuing IRA tax credits and rebates, as the process can be complicated. And if you do not do your filings on time and in order, you may lose out on the ability to capture those credits. Now, there is one company that's mentioned here in the Going Deeper tax credits, but if you do a Google search, if you're looking for organizations that can help you do this, it's not limited just to the one company that's mentioned here in the Going Deeper, but there are others. Just to do a Google search on energy, tax, and services, you'll come up with a list of organizations that can provide you with help in order to make sure you do, in fact, qualify and do not miss the opportunity to capture maximum dollars. Well, we're out of the IRA at this point. A quick mention to green banks. What's a green bank? It's a mission-driven institution that uses innovative financing to accelerate transition to clean energy and to fight climate change. And that's a definition as defined by the Coalition of Green Capital. They were one of the initiators for starting green banks and done a marvelous job in making the program, expanding the program. What they do is they use public capital to mobilize private investment. Currently, there are 23 green banks, 17 states and DC, more under development. Matter of fact, Connecticut, where I used to live, was the first green bank that was started, and New York has a very aggressive and highly effective green bank if you live in those two states. But there is a list of, coming up here, let me start. So the Inflation Reduction Act provides $27 billion in grants to EPA to establish Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which has been allocated. And the intention here is to set up a green bank network and enable low-income and disadvantaged communities to take advantage of doing energy efficiency, renewable energy projects. Now, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, which was set up under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, while it's not directly related to energy efficiency, I just wish to give it a brief mention here because it is a $23.4 billion federal state partnership. So if you're dealing with water projects, don't forget to inquire about what dollars or programs might be available to you in your specific state or municipality. So that's just a reminder, an FYI. All right, so let's move into financing alternatives, which is, I think, one of the key drivers for today's presentation. And I'd like to point out the fact that there is a difference between financing structures and sources of funds. Source of fund could be a bank, it could be a utility, it could be a revolving loan fund through the state. They're all interesting, great potential sources of funds. However, they all require some sort of financing vehicle to structure in order to be able to capture and repay the funding that's being provided. Of course, if it's a grant, you don't have to repay it. But assuming that there is a repayment obligation, now it's important to get a feel for how these different financing alternatives compare to each other. So there's a little map that I put together. We're looking at energy efficiency. Obviously, if you're funding it internally, you don't need to worry about this. Just write them a check. No big deal. However, many people can't do that or don't want to do that for good strategic, logical thinking. I'm not going to talk about bonds. Bonds are sophisticated enough so that if you're looking at doing an energy efficiency project using bonds, obviously, if you could add your project to an existing bond issue, that might make a lot of sense, but I'm not going to talk a lot about that because that is, there are so many different types of bonds that would require its own presentation. But I have divided it into more traditional sources and specialized sources. And so the structures here under traditional leases, there's capital lease and operating lease, tax-exempt lease purchase financing, the types of loans, a consumer loan, commercial loan, and an equipment financing agreement, which is basically a conditional sales agreement, very similar from an accounting perspective to a capital lease. Under specialized, there are loans again. You can either get a loan through specialty funders or through a utility. The utilities tend to have on-bill financing and on-bill recovery programs. The difference between those two is one is funded directly with utility dollars, and the other one is being funded by a third party, and the utility is strictly providing servicing of the loan. They tend to be below market, although not always, and that's a great place if your utility happens to be offering a financing program to take a quick look. You may wind up saving some money. PACE, commercial PACE, residential PACE, I'll go over that in just a few minutes, and energy service companies and energy services, EPC energy performance contract, traditional energy services agreement, energy as a service, and a power purchase agreement. Now, I have the little renewable energy lightning bolt here by solar leases and PPAs. Those tend to be used more for renewable energy and less for energy efficiency projects. But you can combine them and combine both types of energy savings under one agreement. Depends on the project itself and the investor that's looking at underwriting the deal. So we'll start with cash. I mean, that's a no-brainer. You write a check fast. You don't pay interest. However, funds are no longer available for other income generating projects. And when we're looking at corporations, for profit corporations, they tend to want to generate income as well as save expenses. Whenever you do your own project, of course, you've got maintenance and project management risk. However, these can be contracted to third parties, through an energy services company or some similar organization. Now, the maintenance and project management risk is consistent pretty much through the more traditional financing, and you'll see that pop up time and time again. So let's take a quick look at a loan. I think everybody on the phone here is familiar with a loan. Either you took out a loan to buy a home or apartment or a car or college, university. The pros, potentially lower borrowing costs if you're in the commercial world, short of paying cash. And the reason why potential lower borrowing cost is if you're dealing with the bank, for example, they can tend to file a blanket lien on assets of your organization. So the loan itself is supported by the entire creditworthiness of the organization rather than focusing only on the asset that's being financed. That's an important distinction here. investment tax credit goes to the owner. It competes against other capital projects. Unfortunately, unless energy efficiency is part of your marketing strategy, most organizations would rather generate income rather than reduce expenses. And generating more income can increase profitability. Of course, saving money also improves profitability. We'll get into that when we look at some of the modeling that I'll get into. But it reduces credit lines. So, each organization has a dollar amount that's been approved by the lender. And when you draw it down, that's no longer available, obviously, for other projects. It frequently has restrictive covenants. That's an important point. As I had alluded to earlier, when you enter into a bank loan, for example, they may require that you provide ongoing reporting to them. So you've got to send them your financial performance statements, and they're going to be looking at different performance measurements and to make sure that you are in compliance. Otherwise, they could call in the loan, which creates its own cash flow problems. They usually require a very large down payment. The internal politics, always a problem. Of course, maintenance and project management risk, ongoing. Now, before I get into further types of structures, I want to give you a quick word about off-balance sheet financing. In the technical definition it means a company does not include a liability on its balance sheet. It's an accounting term, and it impacts a company's level of debt and liability. What does that mean? From a practical perspective, if you avoid additional debt, you can improve your financial ratios. These are the things that the banks, if you have covenants, may be looking at: profitability, liquidity, leverage, efficiency, etc. But if you keep it off balance sheet, if you're looking at new borrowing, it could lower your borrowing cost, and it may avoid breaking lender covenants, as I had alluded to earlier. However, alert, the Financial Accounting Standards Board, FASB, changed the rules by creating a special asset class they called right of use and liability, which is a net present value of the payments. So it used to be that this operating leases, for example, were considered off balance sheet, and that created a whole bunch of challenges for people who are reading financial statements. And if you're old enough to remember the Enron fiasco, that's really one of the things that triggered the need for quantifying some of the accounting treatment certainly for off-balance sheet transactions. Now, that said, now we can drill it down a little bit. Now, the old capital lease, now they call it a type A lease. Same thing as an old capital lease, one and the same. Lease to own, asset title transfers at the end of the lease. It has characteristics similar to asset ownership for tax and financial reporting, gives you access to new credit lines. One of the benefits of leasing, of any type of a lease, it allows you to structure the lease payments so you can mirror the energy savings in the repayment. So for examples would be like a step lease or a skip lease. For example, what is a step lease? Step lease is one of which the payments step up as the projects a product is being installed. So the more energy savings you realize, the more you pay back to the investor. So a skip lease is one. It's one that we did for one of the utilities in New York, which was for an amusement park. And they were pretty much closed during the winter, open in the summer. So the skip lease was they made touch payments during the winter or large payments in the summer when they had lots of money. So, it gives you a lot of flexibility, so you can actually tie the repayment of the loan or the obligation to the actual performance of the equipment. Typically, it provides 100% financing, unlike a loan, which requires a down payment, depreciation, interest, tax deductible. It's being secured by the asset being financed, usually not a blanket lien. And the lessee owns the asset at the end, and the tax credits go directly to that owner. Because it's secured only by the asset finance, the financing cost could be slightly higher than a loan because of that blanket lien that I had mentioned earlier. And of course, project management, maintenance, etc. And regardless of of entering into any kind of a loan obligation, you've got to deal with your internal politics to get approval. Now, the type B, they used to be called operating leases, but now they're called type B. And a first cousin to that is a tax lease. Not exactly the same, but they're very similar. Type B is long-term rental agreement. The asset ownership stays with the lessor, the lender, and the lessee. The borrower can purchase the asset at the end of the lease term for its then fair market value, renew the lease, or return the asset. Those are the options. So that used to be, great, I don't own it, therefore I can't appreciate something I don't own. We expense it off. Well, the advantage of that, in some of the pros, excuse me, provides access to new credit lines, gives you that same structuring flexibility, 100% financing. Lease payments may be tax deductible. Now that is more in line with a tax lease than it is an operating lease. And it is being secured by the asset being financed. As I had mentioned earlier, it's no longer off balance sheet. It will go on the balance sheet. It used to be that the tax credits could not be used by the lessee. The Inflation Reduction Act has changed that, which is why I just put a line through it just to remind you this is a change. Owner may be responsible for management, maintenance, and little note about tax leases. They can be expensed for the internal revenue purposes. However, they have to appear on the financial statements for financial reporting purposes. And solar leases tend to fall into this category. Just a quick word about taxable versus tax-exempt lease. When we're dealing with tax-exempt, that means it translates into lower interest rates on the loan. Why? Because there's no federal income tax that needs to be paid on the interest earned. And because the lender doesn't have to pay income tax on that, they will reduce the rate in order to be competitive with other lenders. Public sectors can issue tax-exempt obligations, and that is due to an IRS code, which requires the issuer to have either powers of eminent domain, taxing powers, or police powers. You don't have to have all three, but you have to have one of the three. There was a case in which a private university with a campus police force declared themselves as a tax-exempt entity on their own, and the courts found against them. What happens if you declare tax-exempt status and it's proven or show the courts decide that you did not warrant it? Guess what? The lender is going to recalculate the loan, the obligation, and you're going to be responsible for making up the difference between a tax-exempt rate and a taxable rate. So you really want to be careful to be in compliance with that. However, you don't have to be a tax-exempt or public sector organization. Private sector and large nonprofits can go through a conduit agency to issue tax-exempt obligations. For example, a private university, if that private university had gone through a conduit agency, like in the state of New York, which is TASNY, the New York State Dormitory Authority, they can piggyback on the conduit agency and qualify to get tax-exempt rates. Of course, the agency will take a small fee for doing that, but at the end of the day, the cost to the issuer or the obligor is reduced. And of course, used to be that public sector does not pay taxes, but that has been changed. This is a big change. Now, what's a tax-exempt lease purchase agreement? It's an installment purchase, conditional sale, or lease with an option to purchase for a nominal value, typically $1. It may be referred to as a municipal lease. It can only be issued by a state or municipal or political subdivision like a city, town, or school district, special purpose districts, etc., and some not-for-profits. Benefit, tax-exempt rates are lower. I mentioned that. Gives you that same structuring flexibility. Here's a big benefit. Usually does not require referendum for approval. Why? Because this is basically a lease that renews itself year to year. And if it's year to year, it's not technically debt. So when you get into defining what an organization, a public organization needs for approval to enter into a new loan obligation, this may be able to be interpreted to sidestep that referendum requirement. Payments are usually subject to annual appropriation of funds. This is what makes it not legal debt. The language inside the loan agreement says if you do not allocate funds for this project next year, it's not, it's basically, you don't have to keep on paying, which makes it legally not considered debt. That's the drill down. Interestingly enough, the true interest cost, TIC, is usually lower on this than it would be for a bond for small or medium-sized projects. Because when you issue a bond, there are all kinds of additional expenses that you have to bundle into the cost, setting aside a fund for insurance. You have to overfund the bond. There's a lot of extra costs that can be obviated or eliminated when you enter into a lease purchase. Politics can be very lengthy. Investment tax credit, again, I've left this crossed off because this is now moved from a con to a plus. Maintenance and project, of course, project management is ongoing. Let's take a quick look at energy service performance contracts. It's one in which an energy service company is providing customers with a comprehensive set of energy efficiency, renewable energy distributed generation measures, often accompanied with a guarantee that the savings produced by the project will be sufficient to finance the full cost of the project. Now, that's a very important part of entering into an EPC or performance ESPC, that guarantee that the savings will realize. They typically provide turnkey services and comprehensive measures. They can include project financing, but they usually do that as a separate agreement. So they're going to separate the financing from the technology. So your ESPC will be the technical part, and they'll deal with a third party to provide project financing, especially true when you're dealing in the public sector. Because if the energy services company provides funding to a tax-exempt entity, if the energy services company has to borrow money, they're borrowing at taxable rates, so they cannot effectively pass that through to the borrower. So at the end of the day, by separating the financing agreement, the beneficiary, in this case, the organization that's doing the project, will save money by entering into a lower net cost financing agreement. Project savings guarantee can be critical in order to get the approval to do the project. And of course, the energy service company, the ESCO, will and can help provide monitoring and verification to make sure that what you're saving today continues on into the future. Big con, know what you're entering into, make sure that what you're getting is exactly what you need and not things that you don't need. So you need to be very careful before you sign on the bottom line to make sure this is the kind of project support documentation that you need to make the project work. There's a difference between that and an energy services agreement. It's one in which the equipment is owned and operated by the energy efficiency company and not the host or the ESCO. The equipment financing costs are bundled into the fee for service. Pros, once again, no upfront costs. Project is managed and maintained by a third party, and it may be considered off balance sheet. Now, that could be a really big plus. Careful review of the contracts, again, under the con side. Make sure you only get what you need and what you want. Variations. Traditional ESA, equipment owned by the ESCO, owner pays utility bills. Energy as a service, it's an increasingly important variation, which has, by the way, been around for many, many years in Europe and only recently adopted for use here in the United States, let's say within the last 4 to 5 years. But it's a monthly service payment, which includes equipment upgrades, replacements, manages bills, and suggests alternative energy sources. So because it is a service, it doesn't go on the balance sheet as an asset. You're paying for a service just like any other service. Energy asset concession. I mentioned that here because that came up once in one other presentation. It's one which is much less common, requires very long-term and large projects. It's one in which a third party will buy from the customer their energy generation assets, make a payment to them, and then the location, the user winds up paying a fee for the use of the assets over time. Much less common, but it is something that I've run into. Mention about CPACE, property assessed clean energy. It's a financing mechanism allows low cost, long-term funding for energy, water efficiency, renewable energy projects. It's repaid as an assessment on the property's regular tax bill. And it's processed the same way as other local benefit assessments like sidewalks, sewers, stoplights, et cetera. So it's been around for a long time. It's a voluntary program. You can fund up to 100% of the project hard and soft costs. Terms are up to 30 years, allowing very deep retrofits. Now, the terms up to 30 years, you may find that this is more beneficial than it would be if you went through a more traditional funding source because of the term limitations in today's current economic environment. You can combine it with our incentive programs, take advantage of the tax savings, rebates, et cetera. And one of the benefits is that it may stay with the building when you sell it, which means that if it stays with the building, it may be interpreted to be considered off balance sheet. And of course, it's filed with the local municipalities a lien on the property. This does require state and law enabling legislation. Currently in 40 states and DC have approved it. It's currently active in 30 states. The sticky point here is requiring first mortgagee approval. So if you've got a mortgage on your property, you may have to get the lender, the mortgagee, to allow you to enter into this agreement. Now, what we found is that in commercial pace, it tends to be a little easier than would be in residential, but that is a potential sticky point. And of course, now you're making your payments maybe once or twice a year, so you need to allocate reserve funds, set up a sinking fund so you can make the payments on time. And the local amount generally is determined by the tax capacity of the property. Interest rates may be higher than alternative funding sources, but there's a trade-off here. In order to get 30-year financing and stay with the building on sale, which may keep it off balance sheet, may justify a slightly higher interest rate. Here are the PACE programs. You'll get this map in the presentation copy. You can click on the link here on the bottom to bring you to the actual PACE programs themselves. PPA, power purchase agreement. Legal contract between an electric generator, a provider, and a power purchaser, a buyer. Typically includes electric, hot water, and is used for renewable energy projects. Upfront costs are minimal. Potential to monetize tax benefits are definitely there. It's a known long-term energy price, so you know what you're coming into. There are no or limited operations and maintenance responsibilities, and the risk to you is minimal in terms of performance. The cons, contract term limitations. Could be longer or shorter than you might want. Transaction costs tend to be higher because whoever's going to buy the asset and run it has to make sure that the engineering work that was done on it meets their standards. Time to approve is a little bit longer because it has to go through that extra step. Politics can't get away from. The investment tax credit is usually used by the provider, but it can be used by the end user. That's a negotiable point. And you may deal with challenges with the contract terms and conditions. There may be something in there like take or pay language. So if you haven't used enough kilowatt hours or therms, you may be obligated to make up the difference. So you have to, again, be careful and read the details of the agreement to make sure you're getting exactly what you need. And PPAs, by the way, tend to be very sophisticated, negotiated power purchase agreements. They're usually unique. Quick list of pros and cons. Going over the different types of financing agreements that I just walked through. How do you use these financing agreements to overcome hurdles that are blocking them? Well, the hurdles tend to fall into two different categories. Operational, limited staff, limited expertise. It's too risky. Don't know if it's going to work. I got other priorities. It's not our core business. These are some of the concerns that I've heard in dealing with these projects out in the field. The financial hurdles. Well, it's too expensive. We can get cheaper equipment, however, the savings will be less. Can't take on new debt. That's a big problem. Credit worthiness, another big problem. Return is too low. The strong economy, I want to make income. I don't care so much about savings, expenses. Capital budget constraints. I got to wait until the funds are available in a future year, or the payback is too long. That, in summary, is kind of a thumbnail sketch of the hurdles under the financial label. So how do you use these to overcome hurdles? Well, as you can see here along the top, cash, loans, capital lease, operating lease, PPAs, etc. So if any one of these challenges, what you go down the list here and see which one is going to work the best for you. If it's too expensive, well, any one of those can work for you. And if you use it in conjunction with the cash flow opportunity calculator, which I will show you in just a few minutes, you can use that to overcome by calculating the cost of delay of the projects. And, as you can see, I think it's pretty straightforward. You'll get a copy of this. The chart is based on a paper that we did, Getting to Yes for Energy Efficiency. It's a paper that we did, Catalyst, in conjunction with the Maryland Energy Office. And there's a hot link to it at the very end of today's presentation, so you can download the document itself, and it will drill down in great detail how to use these different financing structures to overcome the individual hurdles. So let's take a quick look at Energy Star's financial tools. Start with the financial value calculator. Quantifies the value of improvements in energy efficiency in your organization by using prevailing price earnings ratio to estimate the market value. So what do we mean by this? Well, if properties, commercial properties, are sold based on multiples of cash flow of the property, which is one of the key metrics that are being used to evaluate the value of a property. If I can improve the cash flow, in other words, improve the energy performance of the building, in essence, what I'm doing is I'm improving and increasing the value of the property itself. So if you're thinking about selling your property and you're saying, why would I invest in energy efficiency if I'm going to be selling it in the next 2 or 3 years? Well, the answer is, you're going to sell it for more. While you do that, you're going to be saving additional money during the period that you keep the property yourself. So this is a very interesting tool that may help you make some of these decisions. The second tool is the Building Upgrade Value Calculator. This quantifies the cost and benefits of the investments for both the owner and the tenant. Because one of the big barriers here in doing this is what we refer to as split incentives. The people who buy the energy efficiency investment are not the people who benefit from the improvement. So if you download this tool, it will help quantify the expected changes and expenses, and it generates dialogues for landlords and tenants so they can talk about how to share the savings from the capital investments. And is included in the BOMA Energy Efficiency Program, Course 5, Building the Business Case. So this is, again, a tool that's tried and proven, and certainly worthwhile if you're dealing with the split incentives challenge. But my favorite is the cash flow opportunity calculator, and it allows you to go toe-to-toe with your CFO, because it's addressing that we don't have the money. It translates energy savings into financial speak, and it quantifies the cost of delay, and that's a big deal. Which is often considered counterintuitive. I've had CFOs tell me that using this tool. Answers how much equipment you can buy from the anticipated savings. It addresses, should we finance it now or should we wait until we have the money from a future budget? or will we lose money by waiting for a lower interest rate? That's a little more esoteric, but very real. How does that work? Let's go into the tool itself. Covers all market sectors, including public and higher ed, as residential, C&I, water treatment, etc. Everybody benefits by using this tool. It started off designed specifically for the public sector, but it has since been expanded. And it really calculates the cost of delay. That's in terms common to the market sector and proposed technology. And it contains, as I had mentioned earlier, counterintuitive conclusions. Number one, installing today and paying interest is a better financial decision than waiting for a future capital budget, thereby avoiding paying interest rates. And number two, that a lower interest rate is not always the best financial decision. Now that sounds really counterintuitive, and quite frankly, it is, until you add into the financial decision the cost of delay, which is what this calculator will do. Calculate that and show you how to calculate that. So what is the cost of delay? Well, the reality is that you're paying for energy efficiency projects whether or not you do the project. What do we mean by that? Well, you can choose not to do the project. You're going to continue to pay more to the electric and gas utilities, water utilities, than you might necessarily have to, which means that if the savings are there, you're not capturing these savings. Therefore, you're continuing to pay for what you could be doing to improve and reduce your total operating costs by choosing not to do the project. So again, if the energy savings are greater than the cost of doing the project, the financing cost, to me, that should be a no-brainer. You can download the tool from EPA, and as you can see, it's built using an Excel model or structure. So you look on the bottom, we have our tabs: introduction, instructions, data entry, investment values, cash flow, interest rates, and a summary report. Let's take a look, drilling down. First tab, anything that is in yellow is a field that can be overwritten. So you can put your name of your organization in there. You have the option for types of analyses. You can identify very specific target areas based on the definition or profile of the project that you're working on. Let's take a quick look at how we can expand the categories here. You can use user-generated categories. You can use benchmark results from EPO Portfolio Manager, green building if you're working on a lead project, water, wastewater. We started off talking about energy savings per square feet. Well, the people in the water wastewater treatment facility areas kept on saying, no, we don't measure things by that. We measure it by million gallons per day. So, we've changed the language in the tool. The concept is exactly the same, but we've made the language more easily dovetailing with the type of project that you're doing. So as you can see here, these are the different options. Pick your poison, pick your option based on the kind of project that you're doing. First tab, and I've chosen benchmarking for this example. Note that changing the options here will erase anything that you put in. So we suggest that you download the tool to your own computer. Do not use it online. Download it and work with it, save it as you see fit. And as I had alluded to earlier, we've opened up the categories. And one of the things that we're going to be doing here is trying to calculate the value of the total savings based on the project. So as you can see here, and the 4 different categories of EPA's Portfolio Manager, it's harder to save money in an area that's performing well. It's easier to save money than the underperformers. Plug your own numbers in here. In this example, with a 1 million square foot, $1.5 million total utility cost project, we're targeting saving $425,000 in this particular project. So that's the target. What are we going to do with that number? Well, we're going to leverage it. Leverage, magic word. Let's leverage. So as you can see here at the top, we're restating everything that brought us to the next tab. This is the savings, the different categories. So you can see that we are just carrying forward so we don't get lost in this process. But in order to leverage, we need to add some additional considerations. We need to start with an interest rate. We need to assume a term. We need to know, are there any additional savings that we can capture here at the bottom through rebates? Or can we use, do we have to use 100% of the savings for this particular project? Now, we worked with a school district on the West Coast, and they need to rehire teachers. So they use part of the savings here to put back into their head count. So these gives you a lot of flexibility. So once you've plugged those numbers in, you push the green button here over here, and it comes up with the total savings. In this example, we can buy $2.8 million worth of savings of equipment. Whoops, sorry. $2.8 million worth of new equipment just by using the savings, using 90% of the savings, which means we're giving 10% back to the organization to spend as they wish. Now, the cash flow tab, this happens to be one of my favorites, is one in which it gives us the opportunity to compare doing it now or waiting until later. Now, this is truly the cost of delay. In order to do that, we need to add some additional information here. Whoops. Over here, it looks a little small on my screen. So what are we adding in order to make that work? How many years are we going to postpone the decision? Is the project cost going to go up or down if we delay it? What's the estimated savings cost going to be in year 2 and years beyond? And how much can we save in year 1? This is assuming that the energy savings have to be more than sufficient to cover all of the entire project cost. So once you enter that data, you look at the 2 different categories underneath. Option A, fast track financing. Option B, waiting for cash. What are the details? Well, we're adding 1 extra year. We're looking at a 10-year financing. We add year 11. The savings, which we calculated in the first tab. Financing cost, that is assuming level payments over the term of the contract with a 0 buyout at the end. And in this example, we only have access to the property for 75%. Could be a school district. So we're going to have to come out of pocket a little bit in year 1. But as we can see in all the future years, the savings are greater than the cost. And as you can see here, the net carry forward. Let's compare that to, let's wait until next year. We're not going to realize any savings. Project cost is nothing this year, but because we forecasted increased project costs, that's going up. Annual cash flow is changing. And if we take the net present value, and this is the magic here, take the net present value of the annual cash flows compared to the annual cash flows, which is a better financial decision? Well, this tool will help you discern that. And as you can see in this example, excuse me, the net present value of financing, $688,000 compared to, let's wait and pay no interest rate. Let's do it again next year, $400,000 NPV. So if I were to ask your financial person, what's a better deal? I think the answer is clear here. You're better off financing it, paying interest, than delaying the installation. This is the true cost of delay. We did this with a school district on the West Coast on behalf of EPA Energy Star. They had a 5-year build-out program. And after looking at this chart, they decided to hire more energy service companies to get the project done faster because they realized that that is a better financial decision than delaying it. So let's look at the consequence. If we use the same numbers, if we delay it for 1 year, the increase is going to be $284,000. That's equal to 10% of the project cost. That's what you're losing. If you delay it for 2 years, you're losing 24% of the project cost. So this can be a real eye opener, and it is counterintuitive, I can tell you. I've had CFOs tell me this after working through this tool. The last tab, interest rate tab, is a little more esoteric, but what we're doing is we're calculating the benefit of the lower interest rate. So you go in and the vendor is offering, let's say, 7% in this example. You're going to finance it at 7%, but your organization says, no, you don't understand who we are. We have access to 4.5% borrowing. We're better off waiting for the lower interest rate than taking the higher interest rate. Now, this actually happened when we were dealing with a property owned in Chicago by a Fortune 100 company and dealing with the manager of the property. I'll tell you that story when I finish going through the model here. So what's the benefit of a 7% versus a 4.5%? Well, if you take the net present value difference between the payment at 7 and the payment at 4.5, you discount it back at the lower interest rate, that's equal to $342,000. That's the benefit of the lower interest rate. Great. Well, I'm taking that money, I'm putting it into the pot over here. And remember, we calculated how much inefficiencies we're losing every month by delaying the project. Well, in this case, it's $35,000 a month. So the question now is, how long can we wait before the lower interest rate costs more money? Another counterintuitive question. This example, it's 9.7 months. Well, 9.7 months, if you're going to get it in 12 months, may not be worth the hassle to go through the extra step of borrowing it and wait for the other loan to come through. But often the break-even point is substantially less, and it makes much better sense to go ahead and take the higher interest rate. Now, let me get back to the corporate, Fortune 100. Talking to the property manager. My question was, do you receive a bonus? Yes, I do. Okay, what's the bonus based on? Profitability. Bam. So if you improve the profitability, your bonus changes. I didn't have to say that, but he figured it out pretty quick. You can generate a report, and I'm looking at the time now. I'm rounding the corner to finalize. You can download these tools by clicking on these different hot points here. I'm just walking you through the website. Under F for financing, you'll find the tools that I just mentioned, and particularly the cash flow opportunity calculator. And there's some opportunity write-ups that you can read more about. If you want to create your own, there's a step-by-step process. So if you don't like our version of the model, we guide you through so you can create your own on your own spreadsheet. And just a quick reminder, there are two other really important tools, Portfolio Manager and Target Finder. Portfolio Manager was mentioned throughout the presentation today. I strongly suggest that you get familiar with that, attend some of the online presentations. And Target Finder, it's a calculator to help calculate and design the assets so you maximize the performance of your property. So with that, here's the additional resources. I added one, as you can see on the bottom, understanding tax deductions, 179D, 179, and bonus depreciation has always been a question that I hear. So I've added that link to the bottom of this list, as you can see. And the two rebate finders, again, for your perusal when you receive the copy of the slides. And that brings us to the end for questions. And I hope I answered a lot of your potential questions throughout the presentation. And I'm certainly open to hear any other questions that might have popped up walking through the data that I've just shared with you. So Chris, do we have